obviously taking place in Germany. You know what, Matt? When we start getting good weather here, you almost think, you want to feel kind of smug about it, and I know it's not the best way to behave, but you kind of do and hope that you're getting the best of the weather. Is that the case at the moment?
It's a bit like that, isn't it, when you go on holiday, isn't it? You want it to be bad at home,
Yes.
sort of thing. But yet, usually when the weather improves here in the UK, there's somewhere in Europe where it has been pretty rough. We've seen the storms in Germany. Just take a look at what has been happening in Switzerland over the last 24 hours. This was Zermatt, of course, well known for skiing. The rages of torrents going through on the rivers in the town, causing lots of damage and debris around. In fact, we've seen storms across many parts of central northern Europe. Tornadoes reported, large hail in the Czech Republic just the other day as well. And of course, if you've been watching the Euros, you'll have seen some pretty nasty conditions at some of the matches too. And there's still some more stormy weather to come across Europe through today. In fact, red warnings at the moment across parts of Poland as this weather front works its way eastward. So some severe weather, and we could see some more intense storms across France, Switzerland and Austria today.
Now, many countries are currently in the grip of extreme weather. In the U.S., President Biden has declared the wildfires in the state of New Mexico a disaster, with thunderstorms complicating efforts to contain the flames. And the first named storm of this year's Atlantic hurricane season caused chaos in parts of Texas and Mexico, where it killed at least 4 people. In southern China, at least 47 people are reported to have been killed in heavy floods, while much of the north of the country is experiencing drought and heatwave conditions. And at least 11 people have been killed in wildfires in southeast Turkey, where the mercury rose above 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit this week. So why is all of this happening now? Well, the science shows global warming is making these extreme weather events 35 times more likely. For more, I spoke to Radley Horton, a professor at Columbia University's Climate School. So in the most basic terms, can you explain how more frequent extreme weather is tied to a changing climate?
Absolutely. So fundamentally, the planet is warming, right? And it might not seem like a lot of warming when you hear about 1 degree Celsius or so. But the issue is that as you sort of raise that baseline all across the globe, the frequency and intensity and the duration of these extreme heat events is going up, and not just a little, but going up dramatically. Similarly, we're seeing more frequent coastal flooding due to sea level rise, and we're seeing heavy rain events that are far more extreme because a warmer atmosphere can hold more moisture. And paradoxically, we're also seeing more drought, in part because that same warming of the atmosphere means that it's more effective at sucking moisture out of vegetations and soils, leading to droughts and fires.
Radley, I found interesting that you've written about the fact that the calendars we relied on in the past are becoming a losing proposition. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so basically a lot of our societal calendars, when school begins and ends, even things like, when we plant crops in some instances, are fixed. But of course, the climate is changing. The statistics of when we expect extremes and how intense they're going to be are changing and changing dramatically. So now we're out of phase, right? We have these sort of asynchronies where a lot of our societal decisions and also, frankly, a lot of ecological systems are out of whack with how quickly the climate is changing.
Yeah, our sense of summer itself is changing, isn't it? I mean, you testified in 2019 in front of Congress about the cost of extreme weather. How do you quantify something like the heat wave that we're witnessing right now here in the U.S.?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some things are very hard to quantify. We're learning more and more about the full scale of health impacts of extreme heat. Children don't learn as well. It affects even prenatal outcomes. It's not just those recorded deaths of people having heat stroke. There's all the other people having kidney issues, respiratory, cardiovascular. So we're just beginning to understand that. And then across the economic impacts, lost labor productivity, infrastructure failures, you're talking major, major impacts for the economy. And if you start to say what the impacts are in the most vulnerable populations, the people who don't always show up in traditional economic metrics like GDP, when you see malnutrition, you can't even quantify some of those impacts and some of the ecosystem impacts as well. So these are enormous numbers.
That is really interesting. And we're hearing from some climate scientists that we're moving to a point where we're no longer possibly able to rein in climate change, but rather moving towards adaptation and mitigation measures. What do those look like?
Yeah, so we need both. We need mitigation, major emissions reduction. That's as important as ever. So that's electrification of our grid based on renewable energy, for example. It's moving more towards battery power to store energy, and it's changes in our food system, consuming less meat, protecting our forests more. That'll reduce the amount of climate change, but as you alluded to, adaptation, preparing for those climate changes and extremes that are underway, more important than ever. Some of it is sort of hard infrastructure, seawalls. Some of it is nature-based solutions, more shade to protect vulnerable populations from heat. It's a gamut of outcomes, and some of it's based on just protecting vulnerable people. If we protect the vulnerable, they'll be in better shape for a range of outcomes, including negative climate change.
Now, meanwhile, more than 1,000 people from several countries have reportedly died at the Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia. Temperatures during the annual journey to Mecca have soared above 50 degrees Celsius or 122 degrees Fahrenheit. Hajj is a lifelong dream for many Muslims, but for families of the victims, the pilgrimage has turned into a tragedy. The BBC spoke to the family of Afandeya, who traveled from Egypt on an unofficial visa.
The broker took advantage of her passion to go and made promises. When I called, her face was as red as a tomato. They made a tent out of bed sheets. They had no accommodation. Official pilgrims have air-conditioned tents and meals. My mum's death broke me.
Saudi Arabia is defending its handling of the event, but there is widespread outrage across the region. Tunisia's Minister of Religious Affairs was sacked after nearly 50 Tunisian pilgrims were confirmed among the dead. And authorities in Jordan have detained several travel agents who helped book unofficial travel to Mecca. Unregistered pilgrims do not have access to proper facilities at ritual sites like air-conditioned tents and buses. The BBC's Alim Makboul reports.
In the searing heat of Western Saudi Arabia, walking for several hours a day, surrounded by many hundreds of thousands of others, performing the 5 days of the Hajj is an arduous undertaking at the best of times. Some thrive in the adversity, but each year hundreds also die of conditions related to heat exhaustion. It may be months until we get the full picture, but given temperatures reached nearly 52 degrees Celsius, there have been fears the number that died this year could be much higher than normal.
I have never seen such extreme heat and conditions. We saw people every 50 yards struggling with the heat, full of perspiration. We found that it was difficult for the old, for the frail, and indeed for the fit and healthy as well.
Over the years, the Saudi authorities have introduced sprinkler systems, tunnel routes and water stations across the massive pilgrimage area and issue advice to use umbrellas and avoid walking in the hottest parts of the day. They've also tried to control numbers with strict quotas, but many religiously motivated use unofficial routes to get around them, given it's incumbent on every Muslim with the means to go on Hajj at least once in their lifetime. Alim Makboul, BBC News.